This evening I'm delighted to be joined by Oliver Westmoreland, a senior immigration lawyer at GSN Immigration. Oliver, thank you for coming in. Don't you think that if you have an agreement that is binding in international law, it ought at least to be practical?
Well, Jacob, I'm a lawyer. I see things in a legal way. If you agree to an agreement, you agree. I think the narrative behind what you say is that the agreement doesn't necessarily work. And you imply that we could rewrite the agreement. We can't. We're one, as you said, I think accurately, one of 146 countries that signed the agreement. The Home Secretary can make representations that the agreement doesn't work, it's not practical, but we can't rewrite the agreement. We can make representations as to why it's no longer practical. But as a lawyer, if the agreement is there, it's there, and the Home Office has to operate the agreement as it stands. As it stands.
OK, accepting that. Let's just hear for a moment what the Home Secretary had to say and then come back to that.
Yes.
When the Refugee Convention was signed, it conferred protection on some 2 million people in Europe. According to analysis by Nick Timothy and Carl Williams for the Centre for Policy Studies, it now confers the notional right to move to another country upon at least 780 million people. It is therefore incumbent upon politicians and thought leaders to ask whether the Refugee Convention and the way it has come to be interpreted through our courts is fit for our modern age or in need of reform.
Well, the point, you make the very fair point that we'd have to get 145 other countries to agree to change it. But normally agreements have a means of pulling out. Is there any means of resigning from the convention?
Very easily, Jacob. The Refugee Convention was not embedded in British law in any really strong way. The European Convention on Human Rights was. It was embedded by the Human Rights Act 1998. The Refugee Convention was not embedded in that strong way. It was embedded here and there in some rules, tweaked. It could be easily tweaked out.
Because we have a dual system. That we have international agreements, but they don't have domestic effect until they're passed by Parliament.
That's quite correct. We can sign international agreements, they're not binding on us until our Parliament has agreed to them.
And this is quite important because ministers can use the royal prerogative to sign agreements, but they obviously can't change domestic law.
Correct.
So are you basically saying that, not that you disagree that it ought to be changed, but that if we change it, we ought to do it in a legal and proper process?
You're absolutely right. As a lawyer, I try and be a technocrat. I try not to have opinion. I know a lot of lawyers do, and they become very famous lefty lawyers. I try and be a technocrat. I try not to have opinions, but we have to follow the law as it is. But I can tell you, if it was politically acceptable, we could withdraw from the Refugee Convention very easily.
So that's really quite important. And what mechanism would we use? Who would we'd have to tell the other signatories, or we'd just have to pass some domestic legislation?
I don't think we particularly have to tell anyone, really. They want to know, but we can tweak a few immigration rules and things. We could easily escape from the Refugee Convention if it's politically acceptable, which is a political issue.
Well, let's stick to the legal issue, because this is really interesting, because often when people talk about international law, they think that it's like the tablets received by Moses, that
Indeed,
it's unalterable, set in stone, governments can't do anything about it. But you're saying actually the government, if it has the political will, can do something about this in a very simple process.
Well, you know as well as I do, Jacob, you sit in Parliament, you know Parliament makes laws, makes primary legislation. There is no doubt that primary legislation is the strongest form of legislation in this country. Parliament can pass any law it wants. This will be a very easy law. Easy for Parliament to pass a law that we are no longer bound by the Refugee Convention. This could be done very easy if the political will exists, which might not, but it could.
And then this would still be compatible with our international obligations.
Well, we don't really have them.
Because that's the really interesting point that I think most people don't know. I think they assume that the 1951 Convention gives us international legal obligations.
Yes.
But you're saying they don't,
it doesn't.
Unless we wish to.
A lot of people, your greengrocer, the person you meet in the pub, will think that it doesn't work like that. International law is only what it is. We are not signed up to treaties we've signed, really. If we wanted to escape from it, we could escape from it very easily. There's no legal comeback, not in international law or national law or anywhere.
And this is fundamental. So when the government says we can't do this because of international law, it's not actually true. They just need to do it. They could get on and do it. They could put an act before Parliament, bill before Parliament.
Absolutely.
When we get back after the party conferences.
The European Convention on Human Rights, which is different. That's been enshrined in British law by the Human Rights Act. We can make a new Act of Parliament. I'm not saying we should. We can make a new Act of Parliament to replace and rescind the Human Rights Act, and that's it. We escape successfully, and that is more difficult because the Refugee Convention has a strange history. It was only incorporated in a funny way over several years, and you have to go into case law to discover how it's incorporated.
Well, Oliver, I think that's absolutely brilliant. And clear legal understanding of what we can actually do. Thank you so much. It's the most helpful lawyer we've ever had on my programme.
We tried to GSN Immigration, we cut through to...
Thank you. I hope you'll come on again to be so clear.
Thank you.